Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and this is a channel where we predominantly do book reviews. We're going to talk French existentialist fiction today. The Woman Destroyed by Miss Simone de Beauvoir. This is a book that, especially I think on Instagram, is one of those books because the cover is very bright and Instagrammable. A lot of people, more people, young people have been picking this book up. But Simone de Beauvoir is, this ain't her first rodeo. Okay, she's very well known. And I think that it's cool that publishers will release these types of narratives with shocking, bright covers because it introduces younger people to these classics, because Miss Beauvoir is definitely a classic. She is one of the leading French, not just one of the leading French existentialist philosophers, she is one of the leading existentialist philosophers of the 20th century. So let's hop into it. Idiotic vanity. All women think they are different. They all think there are some things that will never happen to them, and they are all wrong. So in The Woman Destroyed by Miss Simone de Beauvoir, we have a collection of 3 of her short stories. So she wrote fiction and nonfiction. She is, like I said, one of the leading French existentialist philosophers of the 20th century. And in this particular collection, we have 3 of her stories: The Age of Discretion, The Monologue, and The Woman Destroyed. Each of these narratives focuses on a middle-aged woman who is at the peak or is about to enter into the height of an internal existential crisis. Because obviously, if she's an existentialist philosopher, these characters are having existential crises. Beauvoir highlights how marriage, parenthood, and careers — we have one woman here who does have a career — can shape and or detract from a woman's sense of self. I'm not going to go into a synopsis of each of these 3 stories. I'm just going to focus on the overarching themes that occur between all 3 of these narratives. So to begin, Simone de Beauvoir, whose name is so fun to say, I wish I could speak French. Side note, that the top 3 languages that I currently want to learn, there's all these hobbies I want to have and things I want to do and not enough time. French, I think French is a beautiful language. German, I think German is a very cool sounding language. And Japanese. Japanese is a stunning language. Okay. But I wish I could read something like this in the original language. But anyway, Miss Beauvoir spends a lot of time showing how the passage of time alters the changes that occur within people, mentally and physically, but we do get an emphasis on the physical. And within that, she also explores how marriages in particular, it can take a while to recognize how the person that you've married, your spouse, is changing over time. Because you're interacting with them every day for years, it can be shocking when you look back and say, whoa, this person has changed physically, or this person has changed mentally, because you almost don't recognize it. And you have to kind of reconcile how much time has actually passed. That moment possessed the sweet gentleness of memory and the gaiety of a promise. Were we 30 or were we 60? The past remains as obscure as ever. The future is uncertain. So within this theme, we have not just one narrator, but we have these 3 narrators across these 3 stories who are forced to acknowledge that they themselves are getting older, and they have to reconcile this with who they internally feel to be. They also have to reconcile this with the things that have happened in their lives. And they also have to kind of come to terms with remembering who their spouse was in their younger years of marriage and who their spouse is now. In earlier days, I never used to worry about old people. I looked upon them as the dead whose legs still kept moving. Now I see them, men and women, only a little older than myself. Like having been hit on the head when one's sight is disordered and one sees two different images of the world at different heights without being able to make out which is above and which below. The two pictures I had of the past Andre and the present Andre did not coincide. There was an error somewhere. And so this narrator is looking at two different pictures of her, images of her husband, and looking at her husband like, when did my husband age? Because in her mind, she's still seeing him as the young Andre. And now she's looking at her husband and he's like, my husband has aged. And so again, it's this coming to terms with the fact that we all age, we all get older, and being faced with your own mortality. And then also, if you're a person with a career like her husband and herself, she's a writer. This particular narrator, this is from the Age of Discretion, but she's has a career at writing. She's also teaches writing. Her husband is in the scientific field, and they're thinking, with being forced to we're forced to acknowledge that we're getting older. And so with that age, are we running out of ideas? I'm a writer. Is my writing becoming repetitive? Her husband feels like he's not inspired in the scientific world. He feels like he can't come up with new ideas. And so there's this idea of stagnation that sets in. And does the creative self reach a limit as you get older? Do you run out of ideas? In this kind of research, there are necessarily times when one makes no progress. Unlooked for fruit will come from this slow gestation. The adventure in which I have shared so passionately is not over. This adventure with its doubt, failure, the dreariness of no progress, then a glimpse of light, a hope, a hypothesis confirmed. Then after weeks and months of anxious perseverance, the intoxication of success. So these characters in particular are trying to figure out, what do I do when I feel like I've hit a brick wall? Again, it's an existential crisis. You have a field, you have a passion, and you get almost like caught in this cycle, and there's a period of time when you feel like you can't create because nothing is unique. You're just rehashing your old ideas in a slightly different way, but it's ultimately the same thing. So all of these narrators are married or had been married at one point. We have one narrator who is divorced. That would be from the short story, The Monologue. And all of these narrators are mothers. Beauvoir emphasizes how miscommunication plays a massive role in familial conflict. I found this quote that I'm about to share about telephone communication, about how that has changed how we interact with others to be particularly thought-provoking. But of course, hindsight is 2020, so Simone de Beauvoir did not know that we would have smartphones. So I would be curious to know if she were alive today, because she passed away before smartphones were a thing. When did she pass? She lived a long. She passed away in 1986, so no smartphones at all. I would be curious to see what she would say about them. Especially also in this age of social media, when we can connect with people from different countries, see them, we can video chat with them if we want to. I have a friend, hi Christy, if you watch this, she's on the opposite coast from me in the United States, and we video chat to see each other's face, and it's like she's sitting there in front of me and we're chatting and as friends do about everything. But here's what Miss Beauvoir says about the telephone. The telephone It is not a thing that brings people nearer. It underlines their remoteness. You are not together as you are in conversation, for you do not see one another. You are not alone as you are in front of a piece of paper that allows you to talk inwardly while you are addressing the other. To seek out and find the truth. So I just thought that was an interesting tidbit. And again, it's just this miscommunication that we see that happens across the board. In the short story, The Woman Destroyed, we have a woman whose husband is cheating on her. And there's miscommunication, a lot of miscommunication between her and her husband. And it's really interesting, but also heartbreaking in that particular narrative, just to see how this woman is spiraling because she just can no longer connect with her husband. So within that, Beauvoir uses these three women to highlight how a woman's identity within her marriage and within her parenthood can be eroded because she's trying to mold herself to fit who she thinks her spouse and her children want her to be. We really see this again in The Woman Destroyed. And I think that is really the saddest, but the most thought-provoking. That's my favorite narrative, actually. My favorite story out of all of them is The Woman Destroyed. Because this woman is just spiraling because she wants to be her. She's trying to figure out, who am I? Because I've been trying to be for others, my spouse and my children. So who am I? How I should like to see myself as others see me. As for me, I have lost my own image, a straightforward, authentic woman, without mean-mindedness, uncompromising, but at the same time understanding, indulgent, sensitive, deeply feeling, intensely aware of the things and of people, passionately devoted to those she loved and created happiness for them. A fine life, serene, full, harmonious. It is dark. I cannot see myself anymore. And what do the others see? Maybe something hideous. This woman is literally having an identity crisis. I no longer know anything. Not only do I not know what kind of person I am, but I also do not know what kind of person I ought to be. Black and white merge into one another. The world is an amorphous mass, and I no longer have any clear outlines. How is it possible to live without believing in anything or in myself? That last quote in particular really reminded me of Rachel Cusk's Outline trilogy, because we have this narrator whose life is actually kind of at odds. She is separated / divorced from her husband, and we don't get an immediate idea of who the unnamed narrator in the Outline trilogy is, because what we're getting is these series of conversations that she's having with other people, and through those conversations we get an outline of the narrator, because she's shaped by all of these people and the situations in her career, and her teaching, her as a mother, her being a divorced woman. All of this is shaping this woman. That's how we get the outline of who she is. And I can't help but think, if Rachel Cusk has read some Simone de Beauvoir. Just saying. So I'm going to wrap things up here. Let's close. Let's close. I'm getting hungry. I have known of Simone de Beauvoir for a while. And so her ideas are not new to me. If you are interested in starting to kind of introduce her existentialist her philosophy, that was really worded. Let's start over. If you want to start to dive into Simone de Beauvoir and get an idea of what her existentialist philosophy actually is, her brand of existentialism, but also the existentialists that she was interacting with at the time, I highly recommend At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Blackwell. Excellent. It will introduce you to Jean-Paul Sartre. I didn't pronounce that properly, but bear with me. who was her boo thing, Albert Camus, who, yeah, she was friends with Camus for a bit, but they actually had a bit of a falling out. I think after a while, Camus no longer considered him an existentialist, but he is still very, very important when it comes to existentialist philosophy. And so I recommend reading that first, because if you understand where she's coming from, what her thought process is, and not only that, she's writing, she's influenced by World War I and World War II. And so how her brand of existentialism changed over time based on world events and how she had to rethink things. So once you get an idea of that and then you pick up her fiction would make so much more sense. So I highly recommend At the Existentialist Cafe. That being said, this is my first time reading her fiction, or this is my first time reading her fiction, and I'm reading the primary source, also not reading, with the Existentialist Cafe, you have somebody explaining Simone de Beauvoir to you. So yes, this is my first time reading a primary source of Simone de Beauvoir. I really enjoyed The Woman Destroyed. I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about it when I picked it up, just because I've seen reviews from all over the place. I've seen so many people. I noticed that they're maybe a little bit younger, and maybe I can kind of tell by their review that they don't know where Simone de Beauvoir is coming from because they haven't done some previous research. I think that doing some prior research to her brand of existentialist philosophy will help you with her fiction. I've seen a lot of young people read her and review her and say, I have no idea what I just read. But her writing is very straightforward. I don't think she's difficult to understand, but if you don't know where she's coming from, maybe you don't understand why she's writing about what she's writing about. Her writing is straightforward, but I think it is poignant. She gets to the point, but there are also some very well-constructed and thought-provoking sentences. I really enjoyed it. And there were times when, especially when I got to The Woman Destroyed, that particular short story, I didn't want to put it down, because this woman spiraling to despair as her husband is cheating on her, and she's just trying to do everything possible to bring her husband back to her. It was very heartbreaking, but I just couldn't put it down. Yes, Beauvoir is addressing issues that most people deal with at some point in their life, but she is really placing an emphasis on the female experience within these, so infidelity, when you feel stagnated in your career, facing your own mortality and how much time has passed and realizing you don't have much time left. As you get closer to middle age, or if you're already in middle age or past middle aged, I think that middle-aged in particular, those people who've experienced more life are really going to get a lot out of that and find it relatable. Maybe if I was a teenager reading this, or even in my early 20s, maybe it wouldn't be as relatable. I'm still not middle-aged, but my middle-aged years are closer than I think. So, yeah. Actually, Buddy read this with an Instagram friend named Monica, and this was a fun one to Buddy read because we had varying points of view, and we would bounce ideas off of each other. How did you react to this? How did you react to that? So it was fun to hear each other's, to get the other point, to get a different opinion from my own while reading it, because we both reacted differently to different stories. Her least favorite was the monologue, and so we have a woman whose daughter has unalived herself. And it's a stream of consciousness. That particular short story is the shortest one in there, but it's stream of consciousness, so you do have to focus a lot more. It seems like it's all over the place, but this woman is in a state of turmoil, just trying to, one, her marriage has fallen apart, but also her daughter is no longer alive, and so she is feeling guilty and angry. And I connected with that story a little bit more. Personally, knowing what it feels like to know somebody who's unalived themselves. It was interesting to see how, again, narratives are very personal. What you connect with, I may not connect with, and what I connect with, you may not connect with. So this is a fun buddy read. If you want to pick it up, highly recommend reading this with somebody, because you're just going to get so many different opinions. And we would ask each other questions like, how do you feel about this? Or how do you feel about that? And there's decisions that this character made or this decision that this character didn't make. And that was fun too, to bounce those ideas off each other. I am done rambling. I don't read many short story collections, but I enjoyed this one so much, I gave it a 4 out of 5, that it has motivated me to read more short stories. Not just Simone de Beauvoir, but I have other short story collections on my shelf, and I need to get to them. From various authors like Elizabeth Taylor, and I have a ton of Russian short story collections I need to get to, but Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and others. But this has motivated me to not shy away from short stories. I tend to be the person to love to just dive into one long narrative, but short stories have a lot to offer too, and short stories are difficult to write because you have to pack a lot in less with less words, and that takes a lot of self-control and editing and refining, and you just have less space. I'm wrapping it up. Do you like to read fiction from the existentialists, especially those well-known French existentialists that are just iconic and classic at this point? I'm really looking forward to Camus. I do have The Myth of Sisyphus that I picked up this year. I really want to read The Stranger, and I really want to read The Plague. So the Existentialist Cafe that I mentioned earlier goes into Camus, and out of all the existentialists that Blackwell discusses in that book, I really was the most fascinated by Camus. So I really need to go and read his fiction and some of his work. That being said, again, I really enjoyed this. I'm a fan of existential narratives. I'm a fan of just digging into existentialist philosophy. I don't consider myself an existentialist, but I do find existentialism to be, in all of its sex, if you will, to be relatable. So yeah, have you read The Woman Destroyed, this collection of short stories from Simone de Beauvoir? Are you a fan of Simone de Beauvoir? Have you read Jean-Paul Sartre's fiction? Nausea is his most well-known piece of fiction. I will get to that at some point in my life. Feel free to recommend some existentialist fiction from the French existentialists in the comments below. Don't feel free to like, subscribe, and if you've read this one or if it's on your TBR, let me know. And if you've read it in particular, please feel free to share your thoughts, because this one, there's so much to discuss here with other people. If you would like to, please feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my reviews on Instagram first. And I also like to share on Instagram my monthly reading wrap-ups. I put those in an Instagram story, and I also do a dedicated post each month going into a new month, what I am planning to read that month. So, yes, I also like to post funny memes on occasion. I am going to wrap this up again. Please feel free to like and subscribe and leave me a comment, and I will see you in the next one.